So do you go by Bob or Bobby?
Either one. When I hear Robert, it's either my mother and I'm in trouble or the judge and I'm going to jail. So just as long as it's not Robert, then we're okay.
Well, what an honor to have Bobby Ferguson on the podcast today. I would probably have to, it'd take me the whole podcast to list all the things you're doing, and which as a fellow starter and entrepreneur, I'm really interested in that. But a great friend of Michael Deneen and of Valiant Living. Just want to say thank you. What an honor to have you and to host you on our podcast today.
Well, I feel the same. And Michael was good enough to come on our podcast when we were getting ramped up and launched on that about a year and a half ago
Oh yeah.
at Colorado Springs. Um, we met in uh, my hotel room in the Broadmoor,
Uh-huh.
and our alumni guy is kind of an audiophile, so he had all these boom mics set up on the, crossing across the beds, and Mike awkwardly seated in a little chair stuck between the beds, and it was just it was like a bunch of little kids experimenting in a, an audio treehouse or something. It was super weird. And Mike just let it rip, and it was such a great conversation. So I feel like we're just continuing the conversation, and I'm
Yeah.
grateful to do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's I'd love for our audiences to get to know you a little bit, and I definitely want to talk Jaywalker and some of the other things you're doing as well. Um, but I'd love to hear about your personal journey and your story with addiction and recovery and all that stuff.
Sure, Drew, thank you for asking. I am Bobby. I am an alcoholic. I know we've got um, you know, a movement afoot in our field to try to destigmatize addiction. So we're supposed to now say, I'm a person in long-term recovery, but I love addicts and alcoholics so much that I like to say it about myself. I just like I'm Bobby and I'm an alcoholic, um and for me what happened was I grew up in Manhattan, and I came from a loving family. I had a little sister 2 years younger than us than me, and so just the four of us. And honestly, I feel like I was given the things you need in life, um, all the advantages. I had a mom and dad who I thought expected more from me, but when I became a dad myself, I would later learn that parents they don't expect better things from you. They want better things for you, and so they tried to do those things. And I went to a little parochial Catholic school for boys in Manhattan until I was uh, in ninth grade. All the uh, all the we had 24 kids in our graduating class, and everybody went off to a little New England prep school, and I did that. I went off to a little New England prep school, and then from there I went to a small liberal arts college in Virginia. But as I progressed through those um, rites of passage, from this privileged upbringing, private schools, tuition paid, obstacles removed.
Hmm.
Uh, I did so a little bit with um, what you hear a lot about from people in recovery is just a sense of dis-ease, a little bit of anxiety, a lot of self-consciousness, and a wicked need growing up as I did to, for some reason, I think it's just a New York thing as much as anything else, but you want to have, life is like the lightning round. You want to look good, be right, and have the answer first. And
Hmm.
and and I don't think any of that really served me as my addiction started to take root because um, in high school, I was, from the ages of 14 to 17, it was imagine going to high school with no parents around. So, we didn't
Hmm.
have um, automobiles. So I guess in that sense, it was a little safer. But man, life got off the rails for me pretty quickly trying to fit in with the cool kids.
Yeah.
Uh, I remember the first time, uh, I smoked pot and got high and we're doing bong hits in some kid's room, and I wandered the halls trying to get back to my room I could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing. I could feel like, pimples breaking out on my forehead. It was the most angst-ridden anxiety experience ever. And my heart was beating about 170 beats. And I get back to my room and I'm like, I think I'm having sort of a THC induced mini panic attack.
Mm.
And I remember sitting there going, I got to get better at this. Like I need to practice. Like it's those guys, those guys were laughing and having fun, and I can't even complete a sentence. I can't get to the comma. I'm a
So it wasn't I need to stop doing this. It was I got to get better at this.
right, right. Like they say, like an alcoholic, um, whatever, like runs into his neighbor's mailbox and says, "That's it. I got to quit driving." So that's,
Yeah.
you know, but so I smoked pot every day for like the next 8 years, never enjoying it. But that
Wow.
only, I think, calls into sharp relief just how much it meant to me to be a part of, to be seen a certain way, um, and my need, to kind of fit in. But I ended up graduating from college, I like to say, with a diploma, but without an education.
Mm.
I cut corners. Um, and college was awesome. We had an amazing friend group there, and everybody was ripping it up. We were doing everything we could get our hands on all the time, and that wasn't necessarily true for the entire student body, but the entire universe of my social sphere, that was true. And yet, after college, I'm sort of stayed in that mode while others around me, I guess there are about uh, a dozen of us who relocated from Lexington, Virginia to the Upper West Side in Manhattan, and six of us lived together in a two-story brownstone. That was pretty fun and chaotic, but guys were getting promotions. They were
Mm.
keeping girlfriends. They were starting to um, sort of transition into life on life's terms. And, maybe Friday nights would be crazy, but they had normal Tuesdays. And for me,
Mm.
it was just Friday became Tuesday. And I became kind of that problem friend, that guy people were a little bit worried about.
Mm.
Relationships were chaotic. Um, I I began this career as a journalist in New York City, and that sort of dovetailed nicely with the work hard, play hard. Once you had filled 37 column inches and turned your copy in for the week, nobody cared about your lifestyle or if you were when you showed up and when you didn't. You just sort of had to meet your deadlines and stuff.
So you could just crank that out and be done and get on with the party and get on with the rest of the life. Yeah.
Right. Hunter S. Thompson was my hero. I wanted to be, I just sort of adopted this identity of this sort of manic, let's go guy. Um, but still beneath that, I had this need to look good and be right. I couldn't completely embrace my addict identity. So I would go off on these dark-hearted binges in Spanish Harlem's. I got into, snorting coke, became smoking crack, and but I started to compartmentalize that in my life. And so what I what was by the time I finally got fired for not being able to do my work and show up, um, and headed off to rehab, I started a cycle of living in on the edge, creating a crisis, getting fired, going to rehab, cleaning up, turning
Mm-hmm.
over a new page, getting a new job. And that happened 3 times in my from 26 to 29. And I finally had landed a job. I was Caribbean editor for Tour and Travel News, which was um, a sort of a travel industry magazine that covered tourism. And I got the Caribbean beat through a friend of a friend that landed me this incredible job after, and now I've been to rehab twice. And I remembered thinking to myself, Drew, Bobby, there's only one thing that could take this off the rails. You
Yeah.
just, and sure enough, I mean, within 4 months, um, they sent us off on this charter to an island in the Caribbean called Montserrat. And Montserrat had experienced Hurricane Hugo in 1988, and this was in early 92. And what had happened was they had rebuilt their infrastructure. The Minister of Tourism had invited, this junket of media, including, Fodor's and the New York Times. And so I was, I had arrived, this
Mm-hmm.
is, and we're all, flown first class and put out there. And of course they were drinking. And my real problem, I decided, was cocaine and crack cocaine. And I did the whole thing. I was like, oh, okay, I can drink on this trip and then return to my recovery when I
Right.
international timeline or some bullshit. And it went so bad, so fast. It
Oh
was
no.
just um I wouldn't say leaving Las Vegas level, but I woke up there was a tiki bar on the beach, and I woke up the morning after covered with bites all over my body because I'd slept in the sand. And uh, it was bad. And so I go from there straight, I filed my story and went straight to Spanish Harlem and ended up on this 13-day binge, and that was it. That was it. So it was right out of the central casting. There I am at a payphone on the corner of 107th and Amsterdam, calling my parents again.
Mm.
And they said, listen, just come home. We've got a place in Minnesota, and we've got you a one-way plane ticket. We're no longer, I had finally, my parents, through my experience, were no longer interested in my ideas about my after. Like they
Right.
didn't want to hear Bob's grand designs and plans about his recovery. They just said, do what they tell you to do, and
Yeah.
good luck. And that place was it was Hazelden in Minnesota, and um, I went to their 30-day men's primary care unit. They transferred me to a unit called Jelnik, which was an extended care 4-month on-campus program for chronic relapsers. And I will tell you, I really immediately loved that place. There were
Mm.
29 of us, men and women, believe it or not. And every one of those knuckleheads, including me, had earned their seat in that circle. Like
Mm-hmm.
these were these were chronic relapsing men and women with a history of doing well in treatment and badly afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so for me, that was I can I wouldn't say I was hopeful. I mean, I arrived feeling like um, you know, my parents were scared to death. I didn't think this would work. I had tried it before, um, but I sure liked these other people. They were
Mm-hmm.
my people. I really immediately felt like I was in a room full of Hunter S. Thompsons. Like this was it. And I think the important moment for me came about 2.5 months in. Everybody did these exhaustive peer reviews, and they could get intense. And
Mm-hmm.
it's called full group. And what would happen is three peers would get attention from the group over a period of 2 or 2.5 hours, and you would do three peers in 1 8-hour session. So everybody knew full group was coming up, and I was mortified to find out that I was one of the people that the peers had concerns about. Like I was like, oh, because I had a long list of how I was going to help you with your issues, and
Right. Right.
you to come forward with some of your stuff, and
You were the guy in the hot seat.
I was the guy, and I didn't like the experience at all because I kept trying to kind of rebut the witness, and my counselor's like, just be quiet, like. And so we went around the room, and there was 25 people in the room, and when I finally got a chance to talk, I literally dressed down the entire room. I was like, you guys have the collective intestinal fortitude of a lame sheep. Like, I was walking on the serenity path with you, Joe, last week. You didn't tell me these things, but no, you're grandstanding in group,
Wow.
to try to, and I just, I just eviscerated the entire room with my indignity and my rage. And there was this horrible long silence when I was done. There was just nobody was saying anything. And finally, my counselor, who's named Don, turned to me and he said, Bobby, the fact that you're in a room full of people that don't feel comfortable giving you feedback or talking honestly to you about how they experience being with you, that may not be your fault, but it's damn sure your problem. And you're going to live with that the rest of your life.
Wow.
And it's weird because, for a pipe hitting entitled white boy from the wrong, from the right side of town, in the wrong side of town, all of this, there was in that moment, no drugs, no alcohol. I'd been sober for almost 3.5 months. And yet I was alone in a room full of people where all I really wanted to do was be everyone's friend and be connected to them. And
Wow.
that's when walls came down. That's when I suddenly felt horrified and terrified that this had never really been about drugs and alcohol at all. It had been about, a design for living and a system of beliefs and a way of showing up and a need to look good and be right all the time and put my hand on that buzzer and the lightning round that just puts people off.
Yeah.
Nobody wanted to hang with this guy. The Bob Show
Wow.
was very bad ratings, and I felt miserable. And so I sort of broke down, and and about a day later, this bass player from Toledo, Ohio, this huge 300-pound guy comes to my room. He goes, it's true that we don't like you, Bobby, but we do love you. Now let's go. Stop feeling sorry for yourself. You're going to have to come to lunch. Like, stop it. And he just pulled me out of my room, and I got very interested in other people's ideas about their life, about my life. I started to listen. I I I didn't care what your resume looked like, what you'd done in life, what girl you were dating. If you were comfortable sitting at lunch talking to other people, you had something I didn't have. I wanted whatever you had because this wasn't working at all. And that's a strange moment of clarity for somebody that had been, you know, with the dramatic story. I wanted my moment of clarity to come with a
Right.
trembling, putting a dime in the payphone. That's it. It was over, but it wasn't. It happened in therapy. It happened in group therapy. It happened with my peers, and it happened when I realized um, that my grand plans and designs and my outlook and my attitude and the way I showed up
Yeah.
was going to leave me alone in a room full of people the rest of my life. And I had a desperate um, feeling of powerlessness and surrender. And I think today, even at Jaywalker, I find myself talking to families and talking to guys, and I'm like, look, it's not about, you know, it's not about your drug of choice. It's not about um, quitting alcohol
Yeah.
or giving up heroin. You've done that 100 times. The hardest thing you're going to do here is learn how to listen and learn how to get interested in other people's suggestions about your life. We're not wired for that. We're not set up for it. But if you can learn that if you can become interested in other people's ideas about your situation, you can do anything. Like that is the keys to the kingdom. And it's probably more likely to happen with one of your peers or with
Yeah.
an alum than it's going to happen with a highly rated master's level PhD psychiatrist, therapist.
Right.
It, it's not going to come from the place you think it's going to come. It's going to come from, it's going to happen at recess and lunch, not not in your AP class, right?
Yeah.
So put the notebook away and start paying attention to how it is you're getting along with the people around you. So
Well,
that's sort of it for me. Was those people that had the courage to tell me what I needed to know, even when it wasn't what I wanted to hear.
how many years ago was that? Mhm.
32 years ago. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. 1992. And I there were a series of episodes that happened. I ended up going to sober living. Let's say I rearranged the furniture spontaneous in the living room one day. Uh, I was confronted on a few things. It wasn't exactly all smooth sailing, but I
Sure.
always, every time I felt that crisis of identity come up in the context of other people, I I, I started to gain reference points of just transparency, trust, patience, and, and that feeling of, okay, this is where I would continue to create episodes, Drew, where I'd run out of altitude, airspeed, and new ideas and get myself just fucked in a corner. And I'd be like,
Mhm.
all right, it's others. This is the Bob show. Get another opinion, get a second opinion, talk to
Yeah.
somebody. Yeah.
That's really, man, I'm personally just soaking this in because I'm not going to go into it. I don't want to make it about me, but there was an episode last week where I felt very lonely in a very large place, and it was a weird feeling for me because in my former life, I would go into large rooms and be the guy, and
Mm.
that everyone wanted to sit with and hang with. And I was just project. I mean, nobody knew me, and I didn't know them. And I was, but it was a really weird feeling to be in this very large place and be like, no one wants to sit with me. I don't have anybody here that cares that I'm here. I'm all alone. It's like, and I really had to I got home and I told my wife I was really lonely tonight, but in a good way. Like it made me wrestle with why do I need to walk in the room and have affirmation? So I'm curious, and I didn't see the podcast going this way, but I'm so moved by your story. Like, I'm curious, what was that journey like for you going from that, where it seemed like, what I heard you say, is you kind of lived your life and the approval of others and being able to kind of perform and to kind of caring what people think and then moving into just being okay with yourself, being okay. Like, how has that process been? Because I know that's not just an overnight thing. But I'm super curious about that.
Yeah, I don't know. Thank you for sharing that. I totally I don't think there's anything necessarily unique about how I felt that day. I think we've all been there, kind of like,
Hmm.
oh fuck, but or being alone in a room full of people, or that feeling of sort of self-imposed alienation, like that separation that we all feel. Um, I doubled down on unapologetic and relentless pursuit of intimate friendship with other guys. I realized that I'd used alcohol and cocaine and pot, like I shared earlier in my story,
Hmm.
so that I could feel connected, so that I could have a place at the lunch table, so that I could just be a part of.
That was your
And
pathway into those.
I
Yeah.
drank, broaden my universe, lubricate my social situation, give me
Hmm.
some courage, make me feel comfortable in my own skin, reduce my anxiety. And in the end of the day, all it did was ramp up my anxiety and leave me totally alone, literally like in a box of my own making. Like I was, uh, by the end of my use, the chemicals that I had turned to for connection had left me all alone. And so uh, I I today realized, like, I went on in this sober living. We were there for 4 months, and then after was interesting. I did a I did a fourth and a fifth step, and I went through the 12 steps with my sponsor in St. Paul, Minnesota, when I was living in the sober living. And there was this pattern of, no matter where I was or who I was with in my fourth step, um, this guy, Bobby, would show up with this need to look good and be right and step on the toes of others, and they'd retaliate. Like, it's almost like you could change the zip code, you could change the backstory. It wouldn't matter whether it was, you know, Aunt Gertie or my soccer coach. I was the same.
Right.
And what I thought was going to be this very dramatic, Netflix miniseries of intensity. Uh, why is this complicated person, sabotaging him? It wasn't that at all. It's just this boring, predictable, monotonous guy showing up the same way in every different relationship. And so
Mm.
what what ended up, and so that sort of, there's more and more information coming back from this process that we're in, all of us, struggling to get a foothold in sobriety together in in St. Paul. And then when I was done, my peer group said, okay, you've been in Minnesota now for 9 months. You haven't shit on the zip code. You don't know where the dealers are. Like, you've got a
Right.
job,
Right.
you got a bunch of friends. Maybe you don't go back to New York now, because literally up until that point, I had looked at this as sort of a compartmentalized sort of chapter in my life that would conclude, and I would resume, you
Oh,
know,
okay. You would go back to before, but a new man.
right, right,
Yeah.
and show everyone
Yeah.
wicked need to look good and be right. Like I'd show them this new improved version, and for whatever, and it was funny. They're like, don't go back to New York. There's nothing there for you. You've got friends here. We've got a great life together. Why don't you stick around? And I think, for the first time ever, I assigned meaning to other people's suggestions
Mm.
about my life.
Hmm.
But importantly, again, it came from my friends. It came from my peers. I really assigned and attached a lot to what they said. And I was grateful they wanted me.
Sure.
Fuck, and I ended up staying. I ended up staying in Minnesota for 7 years. So, um, which means the people were warm because the weather wasn't. So I
Yeah.
was there for good reasons, with good people doing good things, slowly. But yeah, I think that's what happened to me in transition, was that, like, I kept getting good information about old behavior, and I could see it in a different light, but I wasn't alone. Other
Hmm.
people were alongside, and I I I started to take action and suggestions that other people recommended for me, which is a massive departure from
Yeah.
my coping system and my worldview before that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Living in consultation is something I learned at Valiant, and that I can relate to what you're saying, because that wasn't something. I mean, if I ever asked for someone's suggestion, it was just for affirmation of what I already knew I was going to do. you know,
right, right,
so
right.
I can relate to that. So help me bridge the gap here. So that's a beautiful story. Thank you for sharing that part of your journey. And I know a lot of people listening or watching are going to find a lot of hope and a lot of help in that. So help me bridge the gap between that's who you are. You're in Minnesota for 7 years to, I mean, a lot of life was lived between that and, was it 2005 when Jaywalker was
Yeah.
born? I think that's right. So help me bridge that those years a little bit. What was Bobby like in between the recovery and getting sober and then starting your own lodge here for recovery?
Um, well, hopefully and thankfully, I think that origin story about my recovery ties in a lot to the origin story at Jaywalker. And almost like one of those old get off my lawn guys, like, I don't know much, but here's what I know.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I, I mean, we're talking about an enormously complex universe of human variables, but my little slice of it, and the part that I keep returning to, is like-minded peers, friends, uh, passengers, uh, rescued the moment after shipwreck. This whole idea of this happy lot of castaways,
Hmm.
the broken toys coming out from under the bed to live their best life together. This was the narrative that was unfolding for me, in Minnesota. And um, uh, I worked at a warehouse. I did what everybody else did. We were told to get a job in the sober living, and it had to be a 40-hour-a-week job. And of course, I go out and and everybody's working these recovery kind of get well jobs. Maybe you'd be working on a construction site. There was a warehouse that serviced a nonprofit that a lot of people went to work for. There were call centers. Um, but of course, I go out and I get offered a 25-hour-a-week unpaid internship at Minnesota Public Radio. So I'm grasping for that differentiator, that
Right.
elite, different, like that identity that separates me. Like, I'm going to get a career job in a halfway house like this. And again, my peers were like, no, man, get on the bus, go work at
Yeah.
the warehouse with us. We'll do it together. And for some reason, it's funny because I took it to my counselor, and he said, and his name was Tom Savage, and Tom said, well, it sounds great to me. I'm sure that it's okay. We can find 15 hours a week to fill in the gaps doing service work or something. But why don't we take it to your peers and see what they say? And they immediately were like, fuck no, you're not doing that. This is your story. This is what you always do.
Right,
You
right. They
always
could
went
see it
back.
in you better than you could see it in yourself at that point. Yeah.
Right. And Tom was like, well, sounds like the jury has spoken, and I remember I woke up the next morning, I'm like, fuck it, I'm gonna work at the warehouse. And so there were these just episodes of me acting this new behavior, like interested in doing what other people suggested. And of course, it was the greatest life. Like, you get up early, you go to the warehouse, we'd be done at like 2 in the afternoon, go play 9 holes of golf at the Muni, go to an AA meeting, eat dinner with everybody. And it just had this rhythm and routine. And I ended up meeting a girl in Alcoholics Anonymous. I like to say, we had a cup of coffee and a couple of kids, and we're still today. She had gone through Fellowship Club, the sober living, before me, so we didn't go there together, but we met at the McAllister College Big Book Study Group. And so this life starts to come together out there. After a couple of years working at Rivertown Trading, which was this mail order catalog company, I worked in customer service in the warehouse for a while, and then went to work at Hazelden. And I was hired as an alumni coordinator. Great entry level job at any treatment center, but at Hazelden they had about 55,000 alumni. This
Wow.
far-flung network across the country. They've been in business for almost 50 years. And I love that work. This was the greatest job ever. And why I bring it up is because that really was, in many ways, um, the archway or the bridge between um, everything I came to know about my own recovery, and then about treatment I learned in those 6 years that I worked at Hazelden, and working specifically with alumni. And Jaywalker today has a tremendous alumni community, and we focus on alumni, but it was never strategic. It was that it was founded by a guy who grew up in alumni relations. And so
Yeah.
I don't know clinical, I don't know business development, I don't know operations and administration. What I know is a like-minded community of people with a common call to purpose and sobriety that are growing and changing and evolving after treatment. After
Mm.
treatment,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
everything I learned about treatment was in after treatment.
Sure.
And what does that community look like? What does it look like to manage that gratitude? What does it look like to leverage those resources? What does it look like, um, you know, to show up, and how do we show up in that space? So, um, alumni relations at Hazelden was positioned on the org chart in a strange place. It was underneath Executive Vice President Mike Schicks, who ran all of recovery services. So Mike Schicks was in charge of all recovery related activities at Hazelden. Hazelden,
Mm-hmm.
New York, Hazelden, Chicago, Hazelden, Florida, Hazelden, Minnesota. And I say that because many programs, if they even have alumni resources, put them under, ultimately Hazelden, for instance, moved it under development, which is fundraising.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it could live under business development. It could live under uh, publishing because you want to sell more books to alumni. But it touched all those areas. But what it said to me was, here was an organization that was going to show up with resources in support of the growth and ongoing recovery of its clients that were no longer paid clients. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and so I guess what I'm saying is, um, that as much as anything informed my worldview of treatment, where I felt treatment could be most effective,
Mm-hmm.
where I was most comfortable, um, with this these sort of like-minded recovery champions that wanted to stay together after the fact, um, and 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 that was and is critical in my when I opened Jaywalker in 2005. I had worked for Hazelden in alumni, as I said, and then I worked in business development for a program in California called Promises.
Okay.
Uh, Also for one in Antigua in the Caribbean, started by Eric Clapton, called Crossroads. And in those business development jobs, I would be living in Colorado. My wife and I moved um, in 2000 from Minnesota to Snowmass Village, Colorado, on the western slope, about 3 hours west of Denver. And our kids were 3 and 1, and I was doing these business development jobs based in Colorado, but kind of a traveling salesman
Mm-hmm.
for Clapton's program down in the Caribbean, and then for Promises, which was in West LA and in Malibu. And I got to visit a lot of other programs. So that and I mean, I would say several dozen over that period of 5 years,
Sure.
uh, maybe over 100. And so when I opened Jaywalker, in we incorporated in '04, and we opened in '05. I have to confess that I did it really with more of a list of pet peeves and personal preferences about all these other programs that I'd seen.
Here's what I'm not gonna do. Yeah.
Exactly. Like, and I was always a kind of terrible employee. You really don't want me working in your system because I'm that guy. How come they always do this? Or
Right.
it doesn't make any sense to me. Like if I were if I were in a pizza restaurant, I'd want to change the sauce. It's just I'm just that bad
Oh
employee. And
man. Yeah.
so I had these grandiose ideas about, like, this is bullshit, man. And like so I it wasn't so much a pro forma strategically informed, focus group tested uh operating plan as like, all right, here's what I don't like, and here's what I do like, and here's what we're gonna do. And um, and a lot of that was drawn from I didn't I felt that alumni need to be part of a treatment experience they have more credibility than staff, they have more credibility than parents, they have more credibility than even current and former, I mean, and your peer group, like alumni had such an impact on me at Hazelden. They would come in every night. They'd tell their story from 7 to 7:30. I couldn't get an angle on why they were there. They
Huh.
weren't paid. And so I wanted to move alumni at Jaywalker from the periphery to the center. Like they needed to be in the middle of the bullseye from day one. That was one of my pet peeves. Another one was that I felt like this entire industry was pussyfooting around the 12 steps. Like the Minnesota model at the time was universal. Like it was pretty much going to be, regardless of whether it said it on the website or in the brochure, you were going to find yourself, with those 12 steps on the wall when you showed up at that treatment center, and they were going to be talking about, God and things that people just didn't want to hear about. So
Right.
I felt like we're not, so right on the website, vital spiritual experience. Like we need to start telling people what they need to know from the beginning. We put our
Hmm.
prices on the website. We put our length of stay. And so sort of this sophomoric attempt at like,
Yeah.
we're going to be brutally honest about this is a time consuming and difficult and expensive process. And so we started out with a 4-month length of stay. You had to pass a physical fitness test. You had to interview to get into Jaywalker. All the things that were on Bob's pet peeve list, like, you know, we're going to be, this is the hardest thing you're ever going to do. We're going to tell you that up front. If you don't like it, we'll send you somewhere else. But many are
Right.
called, few are chosen. You might be a Jaywalker. And it was built around this spirit of, I can't, we can, let's do it together. Like
Yeah.
this, we value the peer-to-peer relationship above all else. And I hired 2 unit supervisors from Hazelden that ran units there. They were husband and wife team. They came out and we got this business stood up around these basic fundamental peer-directed operating principles that I'd learned back in that sober living and in Minnesota and back in with those peer groups. So uh, that's the way those two things bridge and connect. Is
Yeah.
I felt like um, David Brooks is a columnist and an author, commentator, and he wrote a book called Social Animal, and he talked about in this book about education, and he has this whole chapter on, and basically it comes down to the idea of, you know, if you send your fifth grader off to middle school, fifth or sixth grader, the most important 2 subjects of the day are recess and lunch. Like pay attention in
Yeah.
recess and pay attention in lunch. And that's where power moves around the room. That's where people find themselves of service. That's where identity and interdependence come into play. And I used to talk to my kids about that all the time. But really, Jaywalker was the program that was going to focus on an unapologetic embrace of intimacy among men. I would direct guys when they arrived, look, don't worry about root causes, family of origin, trauma resolution. We have master's level therapists that'll figure that out. Your job is to make 2 or 3 friends for life.
Mm.
Somebody that's got your back and you've got theirs, right or wrong,
Right.
right? Someone that you can be absolutely transparent with, because nobody's ever taught us how to be friends before.
Hmm.
Nobody's ever taught us about relationships. Nobody's ever focused on the single most important thing that can change your life, and that is um, making friends and having fun. And that's serious business here. So that was the pep talk. Like, let's go. The other stuff will take care of itself.
Right.
But you can see in retrospect, that's very derivative of my own full group experience.
Sure.
And that might be good for me. That is not a universal solution for, we
Right.
had to figure out pretty quickly, like, well, this is effective perhaps for a specific client profile, but we certainly couldn't be all things to all people with that kind of an approach.
Yeah.
And and our counselors were, thank God, much more open-minded, resourced, and sophisticated and versatile than the owner. But that's pretty much the culture, and that's pretty much where Bobby's need to connect with others in a meaningful and transparent way was manifest in the DNA of Jaywalker when we opened, and
Yeah.
it takes its roots back to those aha moments where I found myself finally connected with the people that I love the most. You know.
Yeah. So something that you do there at Jaywalker, and I think it probably goes hand in hand with what you're talking about. You implement it there, and also Alpha Behavior Health. We haven't talked about that yet, but that's in Austin, right? Is that in Austin, Texas?
It is.
Yeah. So something that I was reading about that you do is called the open community model of care. And do you do that in both places?
It is. It's just a fancy way of saying, um, well, it it's about assigning structure, autonomy, accountability, and basically documenting, professionalizing, and chronicling the messy part that comes after containment.
Hmm.
And traditionally, the value promise of 30-day treatment is that you're going to be placed in a safe, secluded timeout from your life for a period of 3 or 4 weeks. You'll be subject to a content delivery system on the disease model, maybe examine some, family of origin stuff, some root cause stuff. You'll get an aftercare plan, and you're good. Then you'll be recovered. And it's ironic because part of my journey brought me into these various service roles with like the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers. I become involved with them, with
Hmm.
the Foundation on Recovery, Science, and Education, which does outcomes research. It's a massive nonprofit looking at de-identified patient data across 100 treatment centers in an aggregated data set to try to figure out outcomes in an objective way. So I've gotten myself involved in various leadership roles in the treatment field, and yet if I had a t-shirt on underneath, my button down, it would probably say nobody gets sober in rehab
Hmm.
on the front, and on the back it would say we get sober in community, right?
Yeah.
Like, we can arrest active addiction in a safe, secluded timeout from your life, but until or unless we look at that messy part in the middle and move our attention, our payer policies, our provider practices, our client expectations move. Life change is difficult. It
Yeah.
requires patience. It requires transparency. It, it would be great if we could contain it, but we
Uh-huh.
can't. But there's a much higher risk, higher reward proposition that happens when you give people kind of the keys to their own recovery. You put recovery on the table. You put relapse on the table during the day, and you've got real recovery at night. But you've got to risk and let go and trust and engage people in real life recovery in real terms, but not just cut them loose into aftercare. And that's where the alumni come in and so forth. So the open community model refers to how everything that a provider does to translate a treatment episode into a recovery experience,
Yeah.
right? It doesn't happen by accident.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen in containment.
Yeah.
It happens in community, and it's a little riskier. It's a little
Sure.
messy. There's going to be relapse. There's going to be things that you got to manage and contend with. But ultimately, that's where agency and autonomy and ownership and equity and traction and recovery really take place when you
Hmm.
let people go. And that's what happened for me again back at Hazelden. I was on that campus for 5 months, and 1 month in primary and 4 months in Jelnik. But when they cut me loose in St. Paul, any one of us could have drank any day, but for some reason we didn't.
Yeah.
And container at that point was the interdependence and the attachment I had to these other knuckleheads, these broken toys. We'd all crawled out from under the bed together, and we were going to go make the world our very own. We were
Yeah.
going to put together. And that's sacred and it's beautiful, but I think providers don't like that. Your director of operations doesn't like the idea of putting 12 guys on a sprinter bus and taking them to a Native American reservation for 12 days. Like shit could go wrong.
Yeah.
Like Habitat for Humanity, they're going to be using power tools. Like there's too many negative, you know, nabobs of or nattering nabobs of negativity in our space that want to put a mouth guard and a helmet on every client and tuck them in every night. And I just feel like until or unless we're willing to let go the way we ask our clients to let go, right? Trust the process.
Yeah.
We need to trust these guys. They're powerful.
Yeah.
Together, they're good. They're good. We're no good on our own, but we're good together.
Yeah.
And we cut them loose, and we've got to trust them, and we've got to give them responsibilities, and we've got to let them have their head, and let them have a little more leash. Yeah, I think it's the field, or we're going to continue to get what we've always got, which is a
Yeah.
byproduct of containment. Is you let them out and game
Right.
on.
Well, I love everything you're saying. I'm super passionate about this because and I'm so grateful that someone in your leadership position is saying these things because I do think a common problem is a lot of guys go into treatment thinking I'm going to do 30, 60, 90 days, whatever, and I'm going to come out fixed. And that wasn't my story, hasn't been the story of anybody I've known that's gone in. I think you said it brilliantly about just getting some space from your addiction or escape of choice is great for that. It's great to get you out of, get you away from that. But I always say, like Valiant for me, and it sounds like this is out of Jaywalker and a lot of other programs, it was just getting me to the starting line. It was just getting me to like, all right, now I have a little bit. My brain is starting to heal a little bit. I've got some friends in recovery space. I've got some language around what's going on and some understanding. But now, about the time where I felt like I was finally coming, my brain was coming back online. It was now go back to Nashville and live this. It's like, well, man, wait. I feel like I just got here. It's been 90 days. And so what does that look like for you? I hear alumni, which that's a big part of it. I love to just if for those that are listening or watching that are like, yeah, I'm either looking at coming into treatment or I've left treatment. I think what you're saying is so profound. How do you help people that come through your program kind of sustain that ongoing relationship with the guys or stay connected to the alumni and all that?
Yeah, what tends to happen is it's a minimum 90-day length of stay. And, I have to be really careful when I get on my little high horse and my righteous, we should do this and we need to speak truth to this, and we can't just do containment. Well, all I've done out here in Jaywalker, and I think this team is, we've reverse engineered a model of care backwards from the best possible outcome. So we're in this beautiful mountain valley, 7,000 people in Carbondale, in this sort of green leafy mountain town at the foot of Mount Sopris. It's expensive and it's time consuming. And if you add
Mhm.
those two things together, it's like a Land Rover to come here. So I'm helping the 1%. So, if you want to be really candid about it, what I've done is create in very much in the image of what I needed. Page 37, more about alcoholism, right out of the big book. This Jaywalker character, this guy who did well in treatment and badly afterwards. There I was in my late 20s, and that's who we serve. Guys in their late 20s with 3 to 5 previous treatments. They've done well in treatment, they do badly afterwards. And they get this massive mulligan out here in the valley. So they come for 90 days, and what we'll tell them is, look, if you don't choose to stay in our community afterwards, we've failed you. Like, you do what you need to do, and we'll make it what you want to do. Like that,
Mm.
you're willing to take that risk. Well, I suppose what I'm saying is that when I talk about t-shirts that say nobody got sober and it, everything's necessary and nothing's sufficient. It's
Hmm.
both. And um, what I feel like that the principles of long-term engagement in recovery for a community, some of them are kind of priceless and some of them are low cost. Like instead of going to a health club, we go to the rec center. It's cheaper and it's more community based. Instead of hiring um, and outsourcing, say, a high cost mountain based expedition experience, or we can go down to Habitat for Humanity. Like there's a lot of things that are set up in the infrastructure of everyone's local community that all it takes is administrators willing to entrust the community, entrust the systems that are set up. We pick up litter and adopt a highway. There's animal rescue sites that are thrilled to have your patients come volunteer.
Hmm.
There's a lot of opportunities, low hanging fruit, low cost. So what I'm really calling for isn't everyone to charge $1,000 a day and make your treatment stays forever.
Right.
It's more like take a look around and see where it is that our need to control and our beliefs about containment get in our way or get in our patient's way in terms of how can we bridge the gap to get people engaged sooner in
Hmm.
community and moving around. So I just need to check myself a little bit there. Like
Sure.
that's and 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 another thing that I think is important and I think would help us is that it gets back to that idea that the value proposition of a treatment episode, without a treatment episode without a recovery experience needs to be examined. We need to be talking about this. Like, what is it that each of us as providers can do? Initiating a hectic and structured reentry into life is an entirely different value proposition than a contained, safe, secluded timeout from your life that arrests addictive behavior. Like
Yeah.
stopping active addiction does require primary care, requires medical assistance. But does the disease model really serve us when we're talking about something at the next stage that's much more of an educational experience,
Yeah.
much more of a social experience than it is? I I know we've got a disease. I'm not sure recovery is an inherently medical experience. I think it's a much more social, psychosocial, and educational experience. And people look at college and education with tremendous resources. We're going to give you 4 years to get that done. We got 4 years to execute our value proposition when we're turning an entire person's life around. But
Right.
to give them refinement and a chance for a better job, families will gladly spend hundreds of thousands of dollars and 4 years on that. But we've tried to shrink it down to changing somebody's life into a 4 week span, and we're disappointed when it doesn't work. And
Yeah.
that's my little soapbox. Like we need to re-examine the whole paradigm
Mm.
around and the reason the medical versus educational thing is important is because we're trying to get our health insurance to pay for it all.
Yeah. That's the
But
tricky part.
it's tuition assistance, it's education, it's
Hmm.
learning how to live life effectively. It's a design for living and a practical program for relationships in your life that I'm not saying it should take 4 years, but we can't do it in 4 weeks.
Right.
And we can't attend to people in a meaningful way by giving them a prescription and an aftercare plan and an app on their iPhone and saying, and there's no other people around. Like, where's the
Hmm.
people? Like, that's the great thing about a 4 year education in college is it's all these relationships. It's all these
People.
people,
Right.
you know, fellow students, professors, people in the community, even at the local bars. You're living in
They
uh,
end up being the people you network with the rest of your life.
and you learn how to network. You learn
Yep.
how to operate and you've got a roommate for 4 years.
Hmm.
You've got shared food in the fridge. You've got to navigate romantic relationships and there's so many things that happen, um, in when we afford a human being the opportunity to make lifelong radical transformation in the college paradigm, and we need it done yesterday in addiction, and it just makes no
Makes sense.
sense.
Well, I love just the mental shift, paradigm shift, really, of the like I had never thought of it through the tuition lens before, and the education lens, and that's really brilliant, and that's rings true in my experience. Because so much of what I learned and so much of what shaped what I'm doing today with my life has been a lot around where has this information been? Like this was an educational experience, and then once I mean, that's only one part of it because, the transformation happens after I apply that education back to my life, and that's a lifelong process. But I was having aha moments right and left at 40 years old of like in growing up in the church and even learning things. I'm just like, I did not know any of this. And so that's why I become so passionate about getting some of this education out in hopes that people have these aha moments and then they'll be like, hey, I might need to look into this further. There's some things here that I haven't examined. So super interesting. I love this conversation, and I love it because I haven't even got to my notes. I don't even know where we're at, and this is what I love about these conversations. But let me ask you this as kind of one final question: the your vision for the future as you're kind of looking ahead into what's next. Really, not just for Jaywalker, for Alpha Behavior Health, but just in general in this space. What are you envisioning? What's the evolution look like of treatment in the coming years?
Um, that's a I wrestle with that a lot because I'm 63 now, and when I started Jaywalker, and I think you can hear it just in my tone and my whole kind of, I'm living in the mountains of Colorado, but I'm still a New Yorker at heart. Like there's this um kind of edginess to how we open Jaywalker. Like we're going to out honest you. We're going to tell you what you need to know, even if it's not what you want to hear. We've got like-minded, motivated soldiers of recovery. We have an, you know, well, this is not a consequence for screwing up as an addict. This is a hopeful and forward-looking promise of your future. And God damn it, we're different. And you guys do it your way. We're going to take the time it takes. We're going to speak truth to addicts, and we're going to get them, loud, proud, and sober. And that's what makes us different. It was all about a competitive differentiator.
Mm,
Now it's 20 years later. And, you know, that's not really helpful to the future of anyone or anything. There are about 34 of our alumni now who are in leadership or ownership positions around the country. And I love that. And Hazelden probably has 10 times that number. So taking that, moving out of our space, launching in around that common, a abiding set of peer-directed principles and so forth, that's a hopeful thing.
mm,
What I guess I'm saying is I was not trying to lead collaboratively. I was trying to differentiate independently and competitively. And that is changed for me. Now today, there's a little less me, it's a little more we. I think, however, the field, when we opened Jaywalker, we did it as a business to business platform. In other words, I wanted to open an extended care chronic relapse program and market it to addiction counselors at primary care treatments centers around the country. So
mm,
that's all we did. 85% of our referrals came from primary care programs that were seeing jaywalkers show up again and again in primary and would refer to us for extended.
mm,
We literally had a list of accounts that we called on that was, 2 dozen at most. And
mhm,
we would visit those treatment centers. We would identify this is our client profile. This is how we treat them. And today, less than 15% of our referrals come from like-minded primary programs. In fact, more and more, our 90-day model is more the standard today than the exception. Back 20 years ago, everybody was 30 days and we were 4 months. So things have changed and evolved. And I see a landscape in behavioral health in general and addiction treatment in particular that through consolidation and through payer policies, we now have many clinical models that are reverse engineered against a reimbursable diagnosis determined by a utilization review professional sitting in a cubicle in the Midwest somewhere about medical necessity for a client, and we're reverse engineering our models
Right.
in terms of following the money and what we'll pay, and that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. And I feel it's gotten to the point where we opened, for instance, now, last November, an 8-bed containment program. In essence, while other primary cares were getting into the extended business, we responded by getting into the primary business.
Right.
So you can stay, it used to be you would stay in containment before you entered the open community model at Jaywalker for 7 days. Now, depending on your RTC benefits and how much residential is there, we'll extend that from 7 to 21 days. I feel that over time, the pendulum always swings back, and that the value proposition of collaboration will be revisited around recovery outcomes over time. You are at the same time, we're seeing these reverse engineered diagnosis-based treatment models emerge. You're also seeing more recovery coaching. You're seeing more peer-directed programs. You're seeing more recovery-oriented systems of care pop up on the back end. Sober living is no longer a dirty word. It's getting the credit. Magic happens in sober living. It needs to be, high standard and so I think organically, what I see for the future and what I hope for the future is this same shift away from competitive to collaborative that I made personally just by maturing. And you want to get old and say, we can do this together, not get off my lawn,
Right.
But I feel that in the long-term enlightened best interests of a recovery outcome, that we will start to see that as we move our resources further down the continuum, those resources are connected to an outcome, and ultimately consumers and referents are going to understand you can't have one without the other. So in the same way, I became less competitive and more collaborative over time in my own mindset. I feel the pendulum swinging back the other way, and it's lower cost out there on the back end of the continuum. It just it takes time and it takes other people, and to the extent that we understand the importance of availability, human availability, like I feel like we've been living in an era where we're trying to eradicate the need for other people to be involved in this process. You see these online apps, you see distance learning, you see virtual treatment, you see outpatient aftercare recommendations that don't even involve groups. Like it is. We need transparency, which builds trust, which happens around availability, because you can pretend to care, but you can't pretend to show up. Having roommates, the magic that happens in a residential treatment environment after your clinical goes home, that's where he orders the hierarchy and group the next day. Like that's, and you can't just take away the four walls and the roof and disperse people in this process and expect um, them to coalesce around a principle-driven, purpose-driven life in the
Hmm.
absence of like-minded peers. Like you just need to find a way to keep that chemistry happening in over time. And I'm hopeful that's what's begun to happen and what will happen. And it'll be driven by uh, better outcomes
Hmm.
and more savvy addiction consumers and referrants.
Yeah. Well said. Well, on behalf of your friends over here at Valiant Living, we're grateful for you and your leadership, your program. I'm new to this space and I don't know if it's unique or what, but I've been blown away by the level of collaboration that happens between programs and, like I told you before we started recording, you're spoken very highly of around the Valiant Living camp. And so really grateful for you. And thanks for sharing today, not just your story, but your wisdom, your expertise. And this has been really great conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you so much.